They laughed when he surrounded the house with wood, but when they discovered the reason, Walter Patterson never imagined that at 68 years old he would become a laughingstock in the small community of Aspen in the Rocky Mountains. After 50 years working as a carpenter and 10 years of peaceful retirement alongside Dorothy, his wife, life had taken an unexpected turn after her passing 6 months ago. It was a freezing May morning when the first neighbors noticed the strange behavior. Walter had started meticulously stacking logs around the house, following a pattern no one could understand. The planks came from a lumber yard in the neighboring town, and he arranged them with the precision of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Mrs. Helen, the closest neighbor, was the first to comment. "That man has lost his mind for good," she whispered to her husband while watching from the kitchen window. "Just look at how he's arranging that wood. It looks like he's building a fence, but it makes no sense at all." Her husband, Mr. Arthur, shook his head disapprovingly. "Ever since Dorothy passed, he hasn't been the same. It's high time the family did something." The comments spread quickly through the neighborhood. Walter's house sat on a small rise, surrounded by other modest homes where families had known each other for decades. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, and unusual behavior quickly became the talk of the town. Walter worked in silence, ignoring the curious looks and whispered remarks. His calloused hands handled each piece of wood with the care of someone who had worked with the material his entire life. Sweat dripped down his face even in the cold morning, but he didn't stop. "Dad, what are you doing?" asked Margaret, his eldest daughter, who had arrived for her usual weekly visit. She found her father with his clothes covered in sawdust, stacking more logs in a formation that seemed to have no logic. His grey hair was disheveled, and she noticed he had lost even more weight in recent weeks. "Just a project," Walter replied without stopping his work. "What kind of project, Dad? We need to talk." "No need to worry, honey. It's all under control." Margaret observed the structure beginning to take shape. The wood pieces were all cut to specific sizes, and her father positioned them following exact measurements. It wasn't the work of a confused man, but of a professional who knew what he was doing. "Can you at least tell me what this is for?" Walter stopped for a moment and looked at his daughter. His eyes still carried the deep sadness of someone who had lost a lifelong companion, but there was something else there, a silent determination that Margaret couldn't decipher. "It's to protect," he said simply. "Protect from what, Dad?" "From what needs protecting." The vague answer left Margaret even more worried. She tried to insist, but Walter went back to work as if the conversation was over. He was always a reserved man, but after Dorothy's passing, he had become even more withdrawn. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. The following week more wood arrived. Walter had hired a truck to unload even larger logs, and the pile began to draw attention, not just from the neighbors, but from people passing by on the street. The modest house, which once blended perfectly with the others in the neighborhood, now stood out because of the strange construction surrounding it. "Mom, we need to do something," Margaret said to her mother-in-law, Mrs. Elizabeth, in a phone call. "Dad has been acting very strange ever since Mom passed." "But is he eating properly?" "Taking your meds, that's fine, but this wood thing is worrying me. The neighbors are starting to talk, and I don't know what to do anymore." Mrs. Elizabeth, at 72, was a practical woman who had raised 6 children and knew how to handle difficult situations. But Walter's situation was delicate. She knew that everyone dealt with grief differently, and perhaps that project was his way of processing the loss. "Let me go talk to him," she suggested. "Sometimes a man listens better to another man, but since there isn't one, I'll try." The next day, Mrs. Elizabeth showed up at Walter's house. She found him arranging the wood in perfectly aligned rows, following a pattern she couldn't understand either. "Walter, my dear, how are you?" "Fine, Mrs. Elizabeth. Thanks for asking." "Can I make you a little coffee? We can talk a bit." Walter hesitated but eventually agreed. They went into the house, which was clean but empty of Dorothy's warm presence. Mrs. Elizabeth prepared the coffee while observing the surroundings. There were papers scattered on the kitchen table with drawings and measurements noted. "What are these drawings?" she asked curiously. "It's the project," replied Walter, drinking his coffee in silence. "A project for what?" "You'll understand when it's finished." Mrs. Elizabeth realized it was no use insisting. She had known Walter for over 40 years since he married Dorothy and knew he was a man of few words, but there was something different in his behavior, a silent urgency she couldn't identify. "People are talking, Walter," she said kindly. "Let them talk." "But Margaret is worried. We just want to understand." Walter put his coffee cup on the table and looked out the window. From there, he could see the wooden structure beginning to take shape around the house. To someone who didn't know what to look for, it really seemed like a meaningless construction. "Dorothy would understand," he finally said. "Then explain it to me how she would understand, so I can explain it to Margaret." "I can't explain now, but when it's finished, everyone will understand." The conversation went nowhere, but Mrs. Elizabeth left with a different impression. Walter didn't seem confused or disoriented. On the contrary, there was a clarity in his movements and a definite purpose in what he was doing. The problem was that no one else could see that purpose. The comments in the neighborhood only increased. Mr. Arthur started making jokes when he met his friends at the bar. "Have you seen what Walter's doing?" he laughed, shaking his head. "He's building a wooden fortress. Must be preparing for a war only he knows is coming." The laughter spread through the group of friends, and soon the story of Walter and his mysterious construction became a recurring topic in their conversations. Some people would purposely pass by the street to see the progress of the strange work. "Poor man," commented Mrs. Grace, another neighbor. "Losing his wife really affected his mind." "Someone should call his children to put him in a rest home," suggested Mr. Harold. "This isn't normal behavior." The words reached Margaret's ears through a mutual friend. The idea of institutionalization made her even more distressed. She knew her father was perfectly capable of taking care of himself, but his behavior really was worrying. "Robert, I don't know what to do anymore," she confided in her husband. "Dad won't listen to me, won't explain anything, and now people are talking about a rest home." Robert, a practical 45-year-old man, had always had a cordial relationship with his father-in-law. Walter was a hard-working and respected man, and the idea that he might be losing his lucidity was hard to accept. "Let me try to talk to him," he suggested. "Sometimes a man listens better to another man. But be careful, okay? I don't want him to feel attacked." The following Saturday, Robert showed up at Walter's house with the excuse of helping with some heavy work. He found him measuring and cutting wood with the precision of an experienced professional. "Need some help there, Mr. Walter?" "Thank you, Robert, but I can handle it myself. What project is this? It looks well thought out." Walter stopped what he was doing and looked at his son-in-law. He was a good young man who treated Margaret with affection and had always respected the family. Perhaps he could understand better than the others. "It's a protection system," he explained, showing the drawings. "Protection against what?" "Against the winter." Robert looked around, trying to understand. It was late May, and the winter in the Rocky Mountains could indeed be harsh. But Walter's house had always withstood the elements well. It was a solid construction, built by the owner himself decades ago. But doesn't the house handle the cold well? It does. But it's not for the common cold. Then what is it for? Walter hesitated. It was the first time someone had asked the right questions, showing genuine curiosity instead of just concern or mockery. "For the winter that Dorothy was afraid of," he finally said. The answer intrigued Robert even more. He had known Dorothy as a strong and determined woman who didn't seem afraid of much. The idea that she feared something specific related to winter was new to him. "What winter, Mr. Walter?" "Like the one in 1975. Robert did the math in his head. In 1975, he hadn't even been born yet. Walter and Dorothy were young, probably newlyweds. Something had happened that year that marked Dorothy so deeply she carried that fear for almost 50 years. What happened in 1975? Walter went back to work, indicating the conversation was over. But Robert had gotten more information in 5 minutes than anyone else had in weeks. There was a specific reason for that construction, and it was linked to something that happened decades ago. "Margaret, I managed to find out something," he told his wife that night. "It has to do with 1975, with something that happened in the winter of that year. 1975. They were very young back then. They just got married in 1974. Exactly. Something happened during their first winter as a couple, something that left your mother afraid. And now your dad is building this protection. Margaret tried to remember any stories her parents might have told about that time, but couldn't recall anything specific. They had always been private about the past, focusing more on the family's present and future. We need to find out what happened, Margaret decided. If we understand that, maybe we can understand what Dad is doing. The investigation began subtly. Margaret started visiting more often, always trying to steer conversations toward the past. Mrs. Elizabeth was also enlisted, since she had known the couple from the beginning of their marriage. Mrs. Elizabeth, do you remember anything that happened to my parents in 1975? Any hardship, any trouble? My dear, it was so long ago, but now that you mention it, I do remember they had some struggles back then. Your father was just starting out as an independent carpenter, and money was tight. But anything specific about the winter? Let me think. Mrs. Elizabeth closed her eyes, trying to remember. I remember there was a very heavy blizzard that year. Everything was white for weeks. A lot of people had problems. What kind of problems? Roofs blown off, heating problems. Some of our neighbors at the time had to leave their homes because they couldn't keep them warm. The information was starting to make sense. A particularly severe blizzard in 1975, when Walter and Dorothy were young and probably without many resources to deal with an emergency like that. And my parents, did they have problems too? Now you've made me remember. Mrs. Elizabeth's expression changed. They came to stay at our house for a few days because their house had a heating problem. Dorothy arrived here shivering from the cold, saying she didn't think she could take it. The puzzle piece began to fit. Dorothy had gone through a traumatic experience related to extreme cold, something that marked her deeply and that she carried as a fear her entire life. Do you remember what kind of problem their house had? It was a small house they were renting at the time. The heating wasn't working right, and with all that blizzard, they couldn't maintain the temperature. Dorothy was pregnant too, if I'm not mistaken. Pregnant? Yes, she was. She lost the baby not long after. We never knew if it was because of the cold or if it was a coincidence, but she always thought it was the winter's fault. The revelation hit Margaret like a punch to the stomach. She had never known her mother had been pregnant before her. It was a secret her parents had carried their whole lives, a silent pain that explained many things. Why did they never talk about this? My dear, back then people didn't talk much about these things. It was a very great pain, and they preferred to keep it to themselves. Margaret returned home with her mind racing. Everything was starting to make sense. Walter Patterson's behavior wasn't madness, but a belated act of love. He was trying to protect Dorothy's memory from the fear she had carried her entire life. Robert, I found out what happened, she told her husband, with tears in her eyes. My mother lost a baby in 1975 during a blizzard. She always thought it was the cold's fault. So your father is building a protection. He's trying to make sure what happened that winter never happens again. The understanding completely changed Margaret's perspective on her father's project. It wasn't the behavior of a man losing his reason, but the final gesture of a husband who wanted to honor his wife's memory in a practical and lasting way. But there were still unanswered questions. Why now? Why hadn't he done it when Dorothy was still alive? And most importantly, how could that wooden structure really protect against the kind of cold that had caused so much suffering? Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out, now continuing. The answers began to appear when Margaret decided to go through her mother's belongings in search of more clues. Dorothy was an organized woman who kept letters, photos, and important documents in a wooden box that Walter Patterson had made for her years ago. Among old papers, Margaret found an envelope with her mother's careful handwriting. Inside, there was a letter dated just 2 months before her passing. My dear Walter, if you are reading this, it is because I am no longer here to say these words in person. I know you have always blamed yourself for what happened in 1975, but I want you to know it was never your fault. We were young, we didn't have resources, and we did the best we could. But I have a confession to make. I am still afraid of winter. I know it's silly after so many years, but every time the cold arrives, I remember those terrible days when we almost lost everything. I remember the desperation, the cold that cut to the bone, the feeling that we weren't going to survive. You always protected me after that, always made sure we had enough heat, always worried when winter came. But now that I'm getting older, the fear has come back strong. I have nightmares about blizzards. I wake up shivering from the cold even on warm nights. I know this might sound strange, but I wanted you to know that my greatest wish would be to feel completely safe in a snowstorm. I know it's impossible, because nature is stronger than us. But I dream of a place where the icy wind couldn't get in, where the cold couldn't reach us. I don't want you to worry about this now. It's just the daydream of an old woman who has lived through too much. But if someday you wanted to give me one last gift, it would be this: the certainty that this place where we were happy would be protected forever from the kind of winter that made us suffer so much. With all my love, Dorothy. Margaret finished reading the letter with eyes full of tears. Now she understood perfectly what her father was doing. It wasn't madness, it wasn't obsession. It was the fulfillment of a last wish, the materialization of a love that transcended even departure. But there was more in the box. Under the letter, Margaret found old blueprints and technical drawings. They were wind protection plans, studies on windbreaks, notes on construction angles to deflect cold air currents. Walter wasn't improvising. He had researched, studied, planned every detail of that construction. The timbers weren't being piled up randomly, but following principles of rural engineering he had learned somewhere. Margaret went down to the living room and found more evidence. On the bookshelf, there were books on rural construction, manuals on weather protection, studies on windbreaks for rural properties. Walter had prepared himself technically for that project. "Dad," she called, finding him in the yard organizing more logs. "I found Mom's letter." Walter stopped working and looked at his daughter, his eyes filled with tears, but there was also a visible relief. Finally, someone understood. "So, you know why I need to do this," he said simply. "I do, Dad, and I'm sorry for doubting you." She was always afraid, honey. Even after so many years, whenever winter came, I could see the fear in her eyes. She tried to hide it, but I knew that woman better than anyone. "Why did you never tell me about the baby?" Walter sighed deeply. It was a wound that had never completely healed, a grief they had carried in silence for decades. "It was too painful. And then you were born, and the joy of having you made us want to forget the pain." But Dorothy never forgot. She always thought it was the cold's fault, that if we had managed to stay warm. "And now you're building the protection she always wanted. It's the least I can do. She spent 50 years afraid of winter because of me. Now I'm going to make sure that at least this place never suffers from the icy wind again." Margaret looked at the structure with completely different eyes. What before seemed like a confusing pile of wood now revealed an intelligent pattern. The tallest logs were on the side of the prevailing winds, and the smaller ones created a graduated protection that would deflect the cold air currents. "How did you learn to do this?" "I spoke with Charles Anderson, that rural engineer who lives in the neighboring town. I showed him the drawings I had, explained what I wanted to do. He helped me calculate the right angles, the necessary height, the ideal positioning." "So this will really work?" "It will. When the next harsh winter comes, this house will be protected like it never was before. The wind will pass over it, be deflected to the sides, but it won't be able to hit the house directly." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Robert, who had come to pick up Margaret. Seeing them talking calmly, he realized something had changed. "Dad, can I ask you something?" said Margaret. "Let me help you finish this." "No need, dear. I can handle it." "I know you can handle it, but I want to help. Mom was my mother too, and if this was her wish, then that's what we'll do." Walter looked at his daughter with gratitude. For weeks he had felt alone, misunderstood, judged by everyone. Now, finally, he had someone who understood and supported his project. "All right, but it has to be done the right way. Each piece of wood has its exact position. Can you teach me?" "I can." Robert watched the reconciliation with relief. For days, Margaret hadn't slept well, worried about her father. Now seeing the two of them working together on a common cause, he knew everything would return to normal. But the neighbors still didn't know the story behind the project. To them, Walter remained the strange man who was surrounding his house with wood for no apparent reason, and now he had managed to convince his daughter to join in the madness. "Look at that," commented Mr. Arthur, watching father and daughter working together. "Now Margaret has gotten into the paranoia too. Poor thing, she must feel sorry for her father." "Or maybe he convinced her there are werewolves in the area," laughed Mrs. Helen. "They're building a fence against imaginary creatures." The laughter continued, but now Walter didn't care anymore. He had his daughter's support, and that was enough. Together they worked methodically and with determination, following the drawings and calculations he had carefully prepared. The work was about halfway done when an unexpected event changed the dynamics of the situation. A hailstorm hit the region in early June, causing damage to several properties. Walter's house, protected by the rows of wood already built, suffered much less damage than the neighbors. "Dad, look," pointed out Margaret, observing the yard after the storm. The parts that are protected by the wood were hardly hit at all. It was true. The hail had been deflected by the wooden structures, creating a protected zone where the intensity of the precipitation had been much lower. It was the first concrete proof that the project really worked. "It was luck," commented Mrs. Helen, who had lost several roof tiles in the storm. "Walter's house has always been sturdier than ours." "It wasn't luck," countered Mr. Arthur thoughtfully. "There's something different there. Did you see how the hail hit his house less? The storm made some neighbors begin to look at Walter's project with curiosity instead of mockery. Perhaps there was some method to the apparent madness. Mrs. Grace, whose house had suffered significant damage, decided to go talk to Walter the next day. "Walter, my house was all damaged by the hailstorm. I noticed yours had almost no problems. How did you do it?" "Wind protection," explained Walter, showing how the wood had deflected the hail. "The hail comes with strong wind. If you break the wind, you break the hail's force too. And that really works? You saw yesterday. It worked." Mrs. Grace observed the structure with renewed interest. What once seemed a pointless construction now showed practical, measurable results. "Could you help me do something similar at my house? After I finish mine, I can give you some tips." The conversation marked a shift in the neighborhood's perception. So instead of madness, Walter's project began to be seen as innovation. Other neighbors who had suffered from the storm also began to show interest. Mr. Harold, who had suggested putting him in a nursing home, was the next to seek Walter out. "Listen here, Walter. My wife is driving me crazy to come talk to you. She wants to know how you managed to protect your house from that hail." "It's a windbreak system. It diverts air currents and reduces the impact of storms." "And it really works?" "You saw it working." "Where did you learn that?" "I researched. I talked with people who understand. I studied." Mr. Harold left there impressed. Walter wasn't the confused man he had imagined, but someone who had found a technical solution to a real problem. The difference was that he had identified the problem before others noticed. As the weeks passed, Walter's project took shape and gained recognition. The wooden structure created a complex pattern around the house, with different heights and angles that directed the wind away from the main building. Margaret had become a dedicated assistant, learning the construction techniques and understanding the principles behind the project better and better. Robert also started helping on weekends, curious to understand the technical aspects of the construction. "Mr. Walter, this is real engineering," commented Robert, observing the calculations noted on the drawings. "You must have studied a lot to plan all this." "I did study. Dorothy deserved that I did it right, not just any old way." "And when the structure is ready, what intensity winds will it withstand?" "According to Charles Anderson's calculations, it should withstand winds of up to 75 miles per hour without a problem. It will deflect most of the force, letting only a breeze reach the house. That's more than most constructions in the region can handle. That's the point. Dorothy was always afraid of not being able to withstand the extreme cold. Now she can rest in peace, knowing this place is protected." The conversation was overheard by Mrs. Elizabeth, who had arrived for a visit. She had been following the project's progress with growing interest, seeing how it had united the family around a common goal. "Walter, can I ask you a question?" she said, sitting on the porch. "Of course, Mrs. Elizabeth. Why didn't you do this when Dorothy was still alive? Why did you wait until now?" The question was delicate, but Walter had prepared for it. It was something he asked himself every day since starting the project. "Because I didn't know how afraid she still was," he admitted. "She hid it well. I thought that after so many years with the house heated, with a more comfortable life, she had gotten over it. I only discovered the depth of her fear when I read the letter." "And the letter, when did she write it?" 2 months before she passed. She must have had one of those fear episodes and decided to tell me the truth. Perhaps she thought she was running out of time." Mrs. Elizabeth nodded understandingly. She knew well the pattern of women from her generation, who tended to carry their fears and traumas in silence, protecting the family from the weight of their worries. Dorothy was always like that, she recalled. Strong on the outside, but keeping the pain inside. "It was from our time, Walter. We learned not to complain, not to show weakness. That's why I need to do this now. It's my chance to show her that I understood, that I cared, that I would have done anything for her to feel safe." "And do you think she knows? That she's seeing you do this?" Walter stopped working and looked at the sky. It was a question he asked himself every day, a hope that kept his determination even in the most difficult moments. "I don't know if the dead can see the living," he said honestly. "But I know that if she could see, she would be happy. And that's enough for me." The work continued at a steady pace. Walter had established a meticulous routine. He woke up early, had coffee, worked until noon, had lunch, rested a bit, and returned to work until late afternoon. It was a schedule that respected his physical limitations at 68, but ensured constant progress. Margaret came to help whenever she could, especially on weekends. She had learned to use the basic tools and could perform simple tasks under her father's supervision. Robert contributed with the heaviest work, especially moving the larger logs. "Dad, how much longer do you think you'll need to finish?" asked Margaret one Saturday afternoon. "If we keep at this pace, about 6 more weeks. I want to finish before winter truly begins." "Do you think we'll have any severe storms this year?" "I don't know. But if we do, we'll be prepared." The weather forecast for that winter indicated the possibility of intense cold fronts, with temperatures that could break records in the region. It was exactly the type of situation Walter wanted to avoid, the kind of winter that had traumatized Dorothy decades ago. One afternoon, while working alone, Walter received an unexpected visitor. It was Dr. William, the doctor who had attended to Dorothy in her final years. "Good afternoon, Walter. How are you feeling?" "Well, doctor. Thank you for asking. Margaret asked me to stop by, see how you're doing. She's worried about the physical strain of this project." Walter stopped working and invited the doctor to sit on the porch. Dr. William was a man of about 50 who had known the family for a long time and had witnessed Dorothy's decline and passing. "Doctor, may I ask you a question?" said Walter. "In Dorothy's last months, did you notice if she showed any specific fear? Fear of what?" "Of the cold. Of winter." Dr. William thought for a moment. As a doctor, he was accustomed to observing subtle signs in his patients, behavioral changes that could indicate physical or emotional problems. "Now that you mention it, yes," he recalled. "She always became more anxious when autumn arrived. She asked repeatedly about heating, if I thought she would get through the winter okay. I thought it was a normal concern for an elderly person. It was more than that." "Do you want to tell me?" Walter recounted to the doctor the story of 1975, Dorothy's letter, and the true purpose of the project he was building. Dr. William listened attentively, making connections between his patient's behavior and the information he was receiving. "That explains a lot," said the doctor. "Trauma related to extreme cold situations can manifest as seasonal anxiety. Dorothy probably suffered from it for decades. And I never noticed. Walter, she hid it well. And besides, you always did everything you could to keep the house warm. Unconsciously, you were already taking care of her fear. But not enough. What you're doing now is admirable. It's a concrete way of dealing with grief and honoring her memory." From a psychological standpoint, it's very healthy. The medical approval brought relief to Walter. There were moments when he himself wondered if he wasn't exaggerating, if he wasn't channeling his own pain in an obsessive way. Knowing that a professional considered his project a healthy response to grief gave him more confidence. And physically, do you think I can manage to finish this? If you continue at your current pace without overexerting, I think so. You're in good shape for your age, but I want you to promise me one thing. If you feel any pain or discomfort, stop and come see me. I promise, Doctor. And one more thing. Let Margaret and Robert help. You don't have to carry this alone. The doctor's visit also had a calming effect on the neighborhood. Dr. William was respected in the community, and his approval of Walter's project helped silence the last critical voices. Mrs. Helen, who had been one of the most vocal critics of Walter's behavior, completely changed her opinion after speaking with the doctor. Dr. William said what Walter is doing is normal, she commented to her husband. It's his way of dealing with Dorothy's death. And besides, that storm protection really works. It really works, agreed Mr. Arthur. You saw how our house was hit harder than his in that hailstorm. Maybe we should stop joking and start paying attention. The man might be discovering something useful. The shift in perception in the neighborhood was gradual but steady. As more people understood the logic behind the project, the laughter gave way to curiosity and even respect. Mr. Harold, who had been one of the most skeptical, started asking Walter technical questions. Explain something to me, Walter. Why are the timbers on the south side taller than the ones on the north? Because the cold winds come mainly from the south. I need a taller barrier to deflect them. From the north, the wind is weaker, so I can use smaller boards. And this spacing between the boards, is there a reason? Yes. If I put them all closed up, the wind hits and bounces back. If I leave some gaps, it passes through filtered, losing strength. It's like a wind filter. Where did you study this? In books, talking with Charles Anderson, observing how it works in nature. Trees do the same thing. They grow in a way to protect each other from the wind. Mr. Harold was impressed with the level of planning and knowledge behind the project. Walter wasn't improvising, but applying principles of rural engineering in a smart and creative way. Can I ask you a favor? Said Mr. Harold. When you finish this, will you teach me how to make a smaller protection for my house? It doesn't need to be so elaborate, but something to lessen the impact of the storms. Of course I can. Each house has its needs, but the principles are the same. Mr. Harold's transformation from critic to interested party was symbolic of the overall shift in the community's perception. Walter's project was gaining credibility and even admiration. The weeks passed quickly. Winter arrived earlier than expected, with low temperatures already in late June. Walter worked with more urgency now, knowing he needed to finish the protection before a real storm arrived. Dad, maybe we should speed up the work, suggested Margaret, worried about the weather forecasts. I can ask Robert to take a few days off to help. No need. It's only 2 more weeks of work. I'll manage to finish on time. But what if a storm comes before? If it comes, the part that's already done will help. And if it's not enough, at least I tried. Walter's determination was unshakable. He had made a silent promise to Dorothy, and he would spare no effort to keep it. Each board placed in the right spot was a declaration of love. Each measurement checked was a way of saying he had understood her fear. The work was entering its final phase when something nobody expected happened. An intense cold front swept down from the south of the country, bringing with it winds of over 60 miles per hour and temperatures that dropped to 23 degrees Celsius during the night. It was exactly the type of situation that had traumatized Dorothy in 1975. The first major winter storm, a real test for the protection Walter had built. The storm arrived on a Thursday night when the project was about 90% complete. Walter woke to the sound of the wind beating against the wooden structures, a sound he had never heard before. He got up and went to the window. Outside he could see the boards trembling under the force of the wind, but holding their position. What impressed him most was what wasn't happening. The house wasn't shaking like it used to shake in previous storms. "It's working," he murmured to himself with a mixture of relief and pride. The wind roared outside, but it was a different sound than what he was used to. Instead of the sharp howl that used to pierce through the walls, it was a deeper, more distant sound, as if the storm were happening far away. Walter spent the night awake, monitoring the behavior of the protection. With each gust of wind, he observed how the structures responded, how they directed the air currents away from the house. Around 3 in the morning, the phone rang. It was Margaret, worried. "Dad, are you okay? This storm is terrible." "I'm fine, honey, and the protection is working." "What do you mean?" "The house is barely shaking. The wind is being diverted exactly as planned." "Really? Over here the noise is awful. It feels like the roof is going to fly off. Here the noise is much less. The difference is impressive." Margaret hung up the phone with a renewed feeling of admiration for her father. For months, she had doubted his sanity, and now she discovered he had built a protection that actually worked. The next morning revealed the extent of the damage in the region. Several houses had lost shingles, trees had fallen, and the power was out in several neighborhoods. But Walter's house was practically untouched. "Dad, this is unbelievable," said Margaret, looking around. "Mrs. Helen's house lost half its shingles, and ours didn't lose any." "The protection diverted the main wind," explained Walter, showing how the system had worked. "Look how the boards on the south side are slightly tilted. They absorbed the impact and sent the wind upward and to the sides." "And why did some boards come loose?" "Those are the sacrificial ones. They were designed to come loose if the wind is too strong, so as not to compromise the main structure. It's easier to replace a few boards than to rebuild everything." The genius of the project was revealed in the details. Walter had thought not only of the main protection, but also of safety systems that would allow the structure to survive extreme situations. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. The news of the protection's success spread quickly through the neighborhood. People who had suffered storm damage began to show up to see how Walter's house had held up so well. "How is this possible?" asked Mrs. Grace, looking at her own damaged house and comparing it to the integrity of the neighboring property. "The storm passed through the whole region, but it seems like it didn't touch your house." "It did touch it," explained Walter, "but it was diverted before it could do any damage. Can you teach me how to do that?" "I can, but every house is different. I need to study the position, see where the main wind comes from, calculate the heights. And how much does it cost to make a protection like this?" "It depends on the size of the house, but it's cheaper than replacing shingles every year after the storms." The practical conversation about costs and benefits marked a new phase in the perception of the project. What had begun as mockery and later turned into curiosity was now transforming into real economic interest. Mr. Arthur, who had been one of the most critical, was the first to publicly admit he had been wrong. "I owe Walter an apology," he said at the bar in front of his friends. "The man wasn't crazy. He was building a solution to a problem we didn't even know existed." "What do you mean?" asked one of the friends. "Protection against strong winds. His house didn't suffer at all from that terrible storm yesterday. Meanwhile, mine lost 6 shingles, and it really works. I saw it with my own eyes. The wind hits those wooden boards and gets diverted. It's like the house has a protective cloak." The conversations at the bar led to more visits to Walter's house. People from other streets began to appear, curious to see the construction that had withstood the storm. Among the visitors was Mrs. Ruth, a 74-year-old woman who lived alone and had suffered greatly from the storm. "Mr. Walter, I'm sorry to bother you," she said timidly. "My house was badly damaged yesterday, and I was told yours suffered no harm." "That's true. The protection worked. Do you think you could do something similar for a small house like mine? I live alone, and I'm very afraid of these storms." The question touched Walter deeply. "Mrs." Ruth expressed the same fear that Dorothy had carried her whole life, the same feeling of vulnerability in the face of nature's forces. "I can take a look at your house," he offered. "See what's possible to do. I'll pay for the work, of course." "No need to pay. If I can help someone feel safer in the winter, that's payment enough." The offer of free help surprised Mrs. Ruth, but it didn't surprise Margaret. She knew her father's generous heart, who had always helped neighbors and friends without expecting anything in return. "Dad, are you sure you want to take on another project? Won't it be too much work?" "Daughter, If Dorothy could speak, she would want me to help others not go through what she went through. It's a way to honor her memory. The decision to help Mrs. Ruth marked the beginning of a new phase in Walter's life. The personal protection project for his own house transformed into a larger mission to help other people feel safe in their homes. But before starting new projects, he needed to finish his own. The last boards were placed on a sunny July morning, almost 3 months after work began. "Done," said Walter, putting the last piece in place. "The promise has been kept." Margaret observed the complete structure for the first time. It was impressive how something that had seemed so chaotic at the beginning now revealed a clear harmony and purpose. The timbers formed a complex pattern that protected the house from all angles, creating a zone of calm in the middle of what could be a devastating storm. "It looks nice," she commented. "Different, but nice." Dorothy always liked different things, Walter smiled. She would approve. "Do you think she knows that she's seeing this?" "I don't know, but I know if she could see it, she'd be smiling." The completion of the project brought Walter a feeling of peace he hadn't felt since Dorothy's passing. For months he had carried the weight of the unfulfilled promise, the anguish of knowing she had lived in fear, and he hadn't noticed. Now, with the protection complete, he felt he had done everything within his power. But the community wasn't ready to let Walter fade back into anonymity. The success of the protection during the storm had created a demand for similar solutions, and several people were seeking his help. "Walter, I need your help," asked Mr. Harold, appearing in the backyard one afternoon. "My house suffered a lot in that storm, and my wife hasn't been able to sleep properly. She gets scared every time the wind blows." "I understand. Did she have a bad experience with a storm?" "Yes, she did. When she was a child, her family's house was completely unroofed in a storm. Ever since, she's had a terror of strong wind." The story echoed Dorothy's. Walter immediately recognized the pattern of trauma related to situations of vulnerability during storms. It was more common than he had imagined. "I can take a look at your house," he offered, "see what's possible to do." "Thank you so much, Walter. I don't know how to thank you." "No need to thank me. We're here to help each other." The visit to Mr. Harold's house revealed a different challenge. It was a larger structure than Walter's, in a position more exposed to the wind. A more elaborate design would be necessary, but the basic principles would be the same. "It will be more complex," explained Walter, making notes, "but it can be done. It'll take about 6 weeks of work, if I have help." "I'll help," offered Mr. Harold, "and I'll pay for the materials, of course. I'll only accept if it's to share with other people who also need protection. There are more folks in the neighborhood with the same problem." The idea of creating a cooperative system to build storm protections matured in the following conversations. Walter realized there was enough knowledge and experience to help several families, provided there was organization and collaboration. "Dad, are you thinking of becoming some kind of storm protection consultant?" joked Margaret. "Not a consultant, just someone who wants to help. If I know how to do something that can help people feel safer, it's my obligation to share." "Mom would be proud. I hope so." Walter's transformation from a reclusive widower to a community leader was gradual, but visible. People began seeking him out not only for technical questions about home protection, but also for general advice on how to deal with weather-related fears and anxieties. Dr. William noticed the change during a routine checkup. "How are you feeling, Walter, physically and emotionally?" "Better than in a long time, Doctor. Having a purpose helps a lot." And that purpose would be helping people with protecting their homes. It would be helping people feel safe. Protecting the house is just one part. "Explain further." "Doctor, I've found that many people carry fears similar to what Dorothy carried. Fears of storms, of feeling vulnerable. When I can help someone build a concrete protection, I'm also helping with emotional protection." Dr. William was impressed by the maturity of the reflection. Walter had found a constructive way to channel his grief, transforming his personal pain into community action. "That is very healthy," commented the doctor. "You're turning a painful experience into something positive for other people." It's what Dorothy would have done if she'd had the chance. I'm sure she would. Autumn passed quickly, with Walter dividing his time between small protection projects for neighbors and planning a more comprehensive system for the community. He had begun documenting his techniques, creating a sort of manual that could be used by others. Margaret helped with organizing the documents and the technical visits. Robert contributed with the more complex calculations, applying his engineering knowledge to refine the designs. "Dad, have you thought about presenting this to the city council?" suggested Margaret. "Maybe they'd be interested in promoting these techniques for other communities." "Not yet. I want to be sure it works well here in our neighborhood before thinking about expanding. But we already have several success stories. Mrs. Ruth's house, Mr. Harold's." "That's true. But I want to monitor at least one full winter before being absolutely certain." Walter's caution was understandable. He knew he was dealing with people's safety and well-being, and he didn't want to create false expectations or promote solutions that hadn't been properly tested. Winter arrived in full force in August. A series of cold fronts brought record temperatures and winds that reached 80 miles per hour. It was the ultimate test for all the protections that had been built. Walter's house weathered the storm without any damage. The protection worked exactly as planned, diverting the main winds and keeping the internal temperature stable, even with the extreme cold outside. "It's unbelievable," commented Margaret, observing how the house remained calm while the storm raged outside. "It's like we're in a protective bubble." "That's what Dorothy always wanted," said Walter, his eyes filled with tears. "To feel completely safe, even in the worst storm. And you managed to give that to her even after she was gone." "I did, and now I can give it to other people too." The other protected houses also withstood the storm well. Mrs. Ruth slept peacefully through the night for the first time in years, even with the strong wind outside. Mr. Harold reported that his wife, who used to panic during storms, remained calm all night. "Walter, you've changed our lives," said Mrs. Ruth, visiting him the day after the storm. "I slept like a baby even with that terrible wind. I'm glad it worked." "It worked more than I expected. It's not just the physical protection, it's the peace of mind. Knowing the house is protected puts me at ease." Mrs. Ruth's comment touched the heart of what Walter was trying to achieve. It wasn't just a matter of physical protection against winds and storms, but of providing peace of mind for people who carried deep fears related to the weather. The succession of winter storms served as a series of tests for the built protections. In each adverse weather event, the structures proved their effectiveness, gaining credibility not only in the neighborhood, but throughout the region. News about the success of the protections began to spread beyond the local community. Regional newspapers published stories about the retired carpenter who created a revolutionary storm protection system. "Dad, look at this," showed Margaret, bringing a newspaper. "There's an article about you here." Walter read the article with surprise. The journalist had interviewed some neighbors and described the project as an innovative solution developed by an ordinary man who wanted to protect his wife's memory. "I don't much like this exposure," commented Walter. "I didn't do this to be in the newspaper." "But it could be good, Dad. It will help other people learn about the techniques. Isn't that what you want?" "That's true. If it can help more people, it's worth it." The newspaper article brought visitors from other towns. Engineers, architects, and even university researchers came to see the techniques developed by Walter. Some wanted to understand the scientific principles behind the constructions. Others were interested in the practical application in different contexts. Professor Daniel Mitchell from the regional university was one of the most interesting visitors. "Mr. Patterson, what you've developed here is very interesting from the perspective of rural engineering," he said, examining the structures. "The principles are sound, and the application is creative." "Thank you, Professor. But it wasn't just engineering. It was necessity." "May I ask what necessity?" Walter told the story of Dorothy, the trauma of 1975, and the promise he had made to himself to protect the house where she had been happy. Professor Daniel Mitchell listened attentively, making connections between the emotional motivation and the technical results. "Do you know you've created something very special?" said the professor. It's not just an efficient technical solution, it's also an example of how engineering can be used to solve real human problems. That's all I wanted, to solve a real problem. And you did. But you also created something that can help many other people. Have you thought about systematizing these techniques, perhaps writing a more formal manual? The idea of systematizing the knowledge interested Walter. He had learned a great deal during the building process and knew others could benefit from this information. Professor, do you think this could be useful for other regions? Absolutely. Problems with strong winds and storms exist across the country. The techniques you developed could be adapted to different contexts. The conversation with Professor Daniel Mitchell planted the seed of a larger idea. Perhaps Walter Patterson's personal project could transform into something with broader impact, a way to help people in different regions facing similar problems. But for now, Walter was focused on consolidating the results in his own community. Winter was coming to an end, and he wanted to carefully document how each protection had performed during the toughest months. "Margaret, can you help me organize a report?" he asked one September afternoon. "I want to write down everything I learned this winter, so I don't forget anything important." "Of course, Dad. What kind of report?" "I want to document each storm, how each house held up, what kind of damage was prevented, what improvements could be made. If we're going to expand this, it needs to be done right." The report took several weeks to complete. Walter revisited each protected property, talked with the residents about their experiences, measured avoided damage by comparing with neighboring unprotected houses. The results were impressive. On average, the protected houses suffered 80% less wind-related damage during the winter. But more important than the numbers was the emotional impact reported by the residents. Mrs. Ruth described how she had rediscovered the pleasure of listening to the rain instead of fearing it. Mr. Harold told how his wife had started sleeping well again during storms. Mrs. Grace reported a significant decrease in weather-related anxiety. "Dad, these testimonials are very moving," commented Margaret, reading the report. "You really changed these people's lives." "Dorothy changed them. I was just the instrument." "How so?" "If she hadn't written that letter, if I hadn't understood her fear, none of this would have happened. It was her pain that taught me to recognize the pain of others." The reflection showed how Walter had processed his grief experience constructively. Instead of letting himself be paralyzed by sadness, he had transformed pain into action, loss into learning, fear into protection. The report was shared with Professor Daniel Mitchell, who was impressed with the quality of the documentation and the depth of the observations. "Mr. Patterson, this is researcher-level work," commented the professor. "You have a natural talent for scientific observation. I just did what I thought needed to be done. But you did it very well. With your permission, I'd like to use this information to develop a university extension project. We could bring these techniques to other rural communities." The proposal opened a new perspective for Walter. He had started with a personal project, motivated by love and grief. Now he saw the possibility of a much wider impact, of helping people he didn't even know feel safer in their homes. "Professor, I agree to collaborate, but on one condition. Everything that's developed must remain simple and inexpensive. There's no point in creating solutions that only those with money can implement." "I completely agree. The beauty of what you've done is exactly its simplicity and economic feasibility." The partnership with the university opened new horizons, but Walter did not lose focus on what truly mattered: the well-being of the people in his community and honoring Dorothy's memory. The first anniversary of Dorothy's passing arrived in October. Walter had spent the last month so busy with the protection projects that he was almost surprised to realize the date. It was an important milestone, but he felt differently about grief. "Margaret, I want to visit your mother's grave," he said one sunny morning. "Of course, Dad, let's go together." At the cemetery, Walter knelt beside Dorothy's grave and talked to her as if she were there. "Dorothy, I kept the promise. Our home is protected just as you always wanted, and I managed to help other people feel safe too. I hope you're proud." Margaret watched her father in silence, seeing how he had changed over the year. The sadness was still there, but it had been joined by purpose, growth, and even joy. "Dad, Mum would be so proud," she said, placing a hand on his shoulder, "of the project, of helping the neighbors, of how you turned the pain into something positive. She taught me that without knowing it. Her letter showed me I could do something even after she was gone. And you did so much more than she asked. I did what love asked." The conversation at the cemetery marked a transition in Walter's relationship with grief. He hadn't gotten over losing Dorothy, but he had learned to live with it in a productive and meaningful way. Back in the community, the projects continued. New families sought help to protect their homes, and Walter, now with the university's support, could offer more sophisticated and efficient solutions. The cooperative system he had imagined became a reality. Neighbors organized to help each other build the protections, sharing costs and labor. It was an example of how solidarity could solve problems that seemed individual. "Dad, look what started from our home project," observed Margaret, seeing a group of neighbors working together to protect a newly arrived family's house in the neighborhood. "Dorothy always said the best things happen when people help each other. She's seeing all this, Dad, I'm sure of it. I hope so, and I hope she knows I'll never let anyone feel unprotected again if I can help it." The promise represented an evolution of Walter's original mission. What had begun as a way to protect Dorothy's memory had become a broader commitment to the community's well-being. As the university extension project took shape, Walter found himself increasingly involved in activities beyond physical construction. He gave lectures on the techniques, mentored engineering students, and even participated in conferences on rural housing. "Mr. Walter, did you ever imagine you'd end up becoming a teacher?" Professor Daniel Mitchell joked during one of these activities. "Never imagined it. I've always been a man who works with my hands, not with words." "But you teach very well. The students love your practical explanations." "It's because I teach what I learned by doing, not what I read in books. It's different." "That's exactly what makes the difference. Theory without practice doesn't solve real problems." Walter's reputation as the carpenter who created storm protections spread beyond the region. He received invitations to visit other communities, to advise rural housing projects, and even to appear on television programs. But he remained true to his principles. He only accepted invitations that could result in real benefits for people facing problems similar to those Dorothy had faced. "Dad, an invitation arrived for you to be on a national TV program," Margaret told him, showing a letter. "And what do they want? To tell the story of the project, show how it works, talk about the impact on the community. Can it help more people learn about the techniques?" "Yes, it can. The program has a national reach." "Then I accept." Participation in the television program brought a level of exposure that Walter was not prepared to face. Suddenly, people from across the country were reaching out, asking for help to implement similar protections in their own communities. "Dad, how are we going to manage to answer so many people?" asked Margaret, looking at the pile of letters and emails arriving daily. "We won't be able to help everyone personally," admitted Walter, "but we can organize the information so others can apply it themselves." The idea resulted in the creation of an illustrated manual developed in partnership with the university, which explained the basic principles of wind protections and how to adapt them for different types of construction and climate. The manual was made available for free, both in print and digital versions. Within a few months, it was being used in dozens of rural communities across different regions of the country. "Dorothy, look what came of that letter of yours," said Walter during one of his weekly visits to the cemetery. "You wanted to feel safe in a storm, and now thousands of people are feeling safer because of your idea." The national scale of the impact brought satisfaction, but also responsibility. Walter knew he was dealing with real people's safety, and he wanted to make sure the shared information was always safe and effective. To achieve this, he created a network of regional collaborators, people who had successfully implemented the protections and could help others in their respective areas. It was a way to decentralize knowledge without losing quality. "Dad, you created something much bigger than you imagined," observed Margaret, seeing the extent of the network that had formed. "I didn't create anything. I just organized something that already existed." "How so?" "People's desire to feel safe, their willingness to help their neighbors, the practical knowledge accumulated over the years. I just brought it all together in an organized way. Walter's modesty was genuine, but it didn't diminish the magnitude of what he had achieved. In 2 years, he had transformed personal grief into a national network of solidarity and community protection. The second winter after the original protection was completed was an additional test for all the structures built. The storms were even more intense than the previous year, but the results remained excellent. "Dad, it seems each winter proves the effectiveness of the protections even more," commented Margaret, reviewing reports from different regions. "It's good to know it works consistently. Now I can be sure we're not creating false hope for people." "And the collaborator network is working well?" "Very well. Each region has its particularities, but the basic principles apply anywhere." The confirmation of effectiveness in different contexts gave Walter the confidence to expand the project further. He began working with non-governmental organizations focused on rural housing, offering the techniques as part of broader programs to improve living conditions. The third anniversary of Dorothy's passing arrived without Walter even noticing. He was so involved with a pilot project in a rural community in the Northeast that he only realized the date when Margaret called him. "Dad, do you remember what day it is today?" "No. What day?" 3 years since Mom passed." Walter stopped what he was doing and reflected on how he felt. The sadness was still there, but it had been integrated into a life full of purpose and meaning. "Margaret, you know what I feel today? Gratitude." "Gratitude?" "For the letter she left me, for the chance to understand her fear, for the opportunity to turn it into something positive. If she hadn't written that letter, I would never have discovered how to help so many people. Mum always said that God writes straight with crooked lines. Maybe that's it. Her pain turned into protection for many people. Losing her taught me to value what really matters." The conversation showed how Walter had integrated grief in a healthy and productive way. 3 years later, Dorothy's memory was no longer a source of paralyzing pain, but of inspiration and purpose. The project continued growing in the following years. The techniques developed by Walter were incorporated into rural housing public policies. Technical schools began teaching the principles in their curricula. Entire communities organized to implement collective protections. "Dad, a letter arrived from the federal government," said Margaret, bringing an official envelope. "They want to honor you as an exemplary citizen. No need for honors. The honor is seeing people living without fear of the storms. But it's important to recognize the work you've done. The work was done out of the love I felt for Dorothy, and out of the love I discovered I feel for people I don't even know, but who go through the same fears she did." The reflection showed the complete evolution of Walter's journey. What had begun as a personal protection project had transformed into a life mission dedicated to community well-being. At 73 years old, 5 years after the original project began, Walter remained active but had begun training successors to continue the work. "Robert, would you take on coordinating the national network?" he asked his son-in-law during a family lunch. "Me? But I'm a civil engineer. I don't have the practical experience you have." "But you have the technical knowledge and organizational ability, and I can teach the practical part. Why do you want to pass this on?" "Because I want to make sure it will continue to exist, even when I'm no longer here. Dorothy planted a seed that grew into a tree. Now, I need to ensure that tree keeps bearing fruit." The decision to train successors was typical of Walter's long-term vision. He had learned from losing Dorothy that life is fragile and wanted to ensure the work developed would survive beyond his own existence. Robert accepted the responsibility and began a gradual transition process that would take 2 years. During this period, he learned not only the construction techniques, but also the philosophy behind the project, the focus on people, the simplicity of the solutions, and the commitment to accessibility. "Mr. Walter, can I ask you something?" said Robert during one of the training sessions. "Go ahead. What do you think Mrs. Dorothy would think of all this that has happened?" Walter smiled, remembering the woman he had loved for 5 decades. "She would be surprised," he finally said. Dorothy was always a practical person, focused on family. She never imagined a personal letter could result in something so big. But would she be proud? She would be. Not of the size of the project, but of the fact that we managed to help people feel safe. That's what she wanted most in life, safety and protection for those she loved. And now thousands of people feel safer because of her letter, because of her love. The letter was just the means. The leadership transition was completed in a simple ceremony in the community where it had all begun. Neighbors, collaborators from the national network, university professors, and representatives from partner organizations gathered to celebrate 5 years of work and to mark the beginning of a new phase. "Friends," said Walter, addressing the group gathered on his porch, "when I started stacking wood around this house, you all thought I was crazy. And maybe I was indeed crazy with love for a woman who was always afraid of winter." Affectionate laughter interrupted the speech. "But I discovered that true love doesn't end with death, it transforms. The love I felt for Dorothy transformed into care for people I don't even know, but who go through the same fears she did. Now, at 73, I will pass the responsibility to younger and more capable hands, but the mission remains the same, to ensure no one needs to feel unnecessary fear of winter." Dorothy planted an idea in a letter. You helped that idea grow and bear fruit. Now it's time for you to tend to the harvest. The speech was met with emotional applause. Many of the people present had been directly helped by Walter's work and knew their lives were different because of the project that had started in that very place years before. After the ceremony, Walter retreated to the backyard, where the original protection still worked perfectly. The wood had acquired a patina of age, but maintained its effectiveness and rustic beauty. "Dad," said Margaret, joining him, "how do you feel?" "At peace," he answered without hesitation. "I kept all the promises I made to Dorothy, and I even managed to help other people. I couldn't ask for more from life." "And now? What will you do?" "I'll stay here in this house she loved, protected as she always wanted it to be. I'll tend the garden I planted in the sheltered space. I'll have the grandchildren over to tell stories, and I'll sleep soundly, knowing I did everything I could. Won't you miss the work?" "I will. But I also know the time has come to rest. I've left the legacy in good hands, and that's enough for me." The decision to retire from the project for good marked the end of an extraordinary cycle. Walter had transformed a personal grief into a national network of community protection, proving that true love can transcend even loss and become a source of good for strangers. The following years brought Walter the tranquility he had earned. The protection network continued to grow under the leadership of Robert and the team of collaborators. Reports arrived regularly, showing the positive impact on the lives of families across the country. Mrs. Ruth, now 80, remained a close neighbor and faithful friend. Mr. Harold and his wife became strong advocates of the techniques, helping to implement them in neighboring communities. The neighborhood that had once laughed at the project was now proud to have been the birthplace of a national initiative. "Walter," said Mrs. Ruth one autumn afternoon, watching the first flowers bloom in Dorothy's memorial garden, "you know Dorothy is proud of you, right?" "I hope so." "It's not hope, it's a certainty. The love you two shared multiplied and reached thousands of people. That's a miracle. It's the power of true love. It never dies, it only transforms." The conversation took place on a particularly beautiful afternoon, with the sun lighting up the garden Walter had created in the space sheltered by the wooden structure. It was a simple garden, but tended with care, where colorful flowers grew protected from the strong winds that had once terrified Dorothy. "You know what amazes me most," continued Mrs. Ruth, "is that you managed to turn a personal tragedy into hope for so many people. That's not something just anyone can do." "Anyone can," Walter disagreed. "They just need to love truly and be willing to act for love." "No, Walter. Some people are paralyzed by grief. Some people get angry. Some people give up. You chose to build." Mrs. Ruth's observation was insightful. The choice to build instead of being destroyed had been a conscious one on Walter's part, but he acknowledged it hadn't always been easy. "There were times I wanted to give up," he admitted, "especially at the beginning, when everyone thought I had lost my mind. If Margaret hadn't found Dorothy's letter, But she did find it, and you didn't give up. And look at the result. The result was visible not only in the flower-filled garden, but in all the letters arriving from people thanking him for the safety they had found in their protected homes. They were stories of families who could sleep peacefully during storms, of children who no longer had nightmares about strong winds, of elderly people who had rediscovered peace during the winter months. Mrs. Ruth, can I confess something? Of course. Sometimes I talk to Dorothy, as if she were here. I tell her about the letters that arrive, about the families who are feeling safe, and I feel like she answers that she approves. And she truly does approve, I'm sure of it. Is it crazy? Not at all. It's love that remains alive. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of one of Walter's grandsons, an 8-year-old boy who loved to play in the protected garden. Grandpa, tell me the story of Grandma Dorothy and the little wooden house again, asked the boy, settling onto his grandfather's lap. It was a story Walter told often, adapted for a child's understanding. It told of a grandma who was afraid of the cold wind, and a grandpa who built a special protection so she would feel safe. Once upon a time there was a grandma who loved this house very much, began Walter, pointing to the structure around them. But she had one fear, the fear of the icy winter wind. Why was she afraid, Grandpa? Because when she was young, she went through a very difficult situation during a storm, and ever since then, every time winter came, she would get worried. And then Grandpa built the protection? That's right. Grandpa learned about Grandma's fear and wanted to help. So he studied, researched, and built a special protection that diverts the icy wind. And did it work? Yes, it worked. And do you know what happened next? Other people heard about the protection and wanted to build it for their houses too. Today, thousands of families live more safely because of Grandma Dorothy's idea. Grandma was very smart. Yes, she was, and very brave too. She had the courage to tell Grandpa about her fear, and that saved many people. The child-friendly version of the story captured the essence of what had happened: love, courage, and the transformation of fear into protection. It was a lesson Walter hoped his grandson would carry through life, that problems can be solved when faced with love and determination. As the years passed, Walter became a respected figure not only in his community, but throughout the country. Universities granted him honorary degrees. International organizations invited him to share his techniques in other countries. But he remained true to his roots, living simply in the house he and Dorothy had built together. Dad, an invitation has arrived for you to give a lecture at Stanford University, said Margaret, showing a letter from the United States. Stanford? What university is that? It's one of the most important in the world, Dad. They want you to speak about sustainable development and community solutions. And what am I going to say to these important professors? The same thing you always say, how love can solve practical problems. The simplicity of Margaret's answer revealed how the family had understood the essence of Walter's work. It wasn't about complex engineering or sophisticated theories, but the practical application of love in concrete situations. I'm not going, Walter decided. I'm already too old to travel so far. And besides, everything I have to teach is already in the manuals and videos we made. But it would be an honor for the United States, Dad. The honor for the United States is having thousands of families living more safely. This is more important than any lecture. The refusal of the international invitation exemplified Walter's philosophy. What mattered were practical results, not recognition. He had learned that true satisfaction came from knowing his work made a difference in people's real lives. The 10th anniversary of Dorothy's passing was marked by a special celebration in the community. The National Protection Network had reached the milestone of 50,000 families helped, and representatives from various regions came to the original house to give thanks and celebrate. Friends, said Walter, now 78, addressing the group gathered in the memorial garden. 10 years ago, Dorothy left us, leaving behind a letter that changed not only my life but the lives of thousands of people. Today, when I look at this garden flourishing, protected from the wind, I think of all the families who can sleep peacefully during storms. I think of children who are no longer afraid of winter. I think of the elderly who have found peace in the cold months. Dorothy always wanted to feel safe. Today, 50,000 families feel safer because of her. That is what I call eternal love. The speech was met with an emotional ovation. Many of those present had personally experienced the impact of the protections in their own lives, and they knew they were participating in something truly special. After the celebration, Walter retreated to the porch, where he often spent afternoons watching the neighborhood activity. Margaret joined him, as she had frequently done in recent years. "Dad, did you ever imagine that a letter could result in all this?" "Never," he answered honestly. "When I first read that letter, I just wanted to protect this house. I didn't imagine other people had similar fears." "And today, do you feel fulfilled?" "I feel at peace. I did everything I could for Dorothy, and I still managed to help a lot of people. When my time to leave comes, I'll go with a clear conscience." "Don't talk like that, Dad." "Margaret, I'm 78 years old. It's natural to think about these things. And you know what gives me peace? Knowing that the work will continue, that Dorothy's legacy will keep protecting people even when I'm no longer here." The conversation about legacy had been recurring in recent years. Walter had taken care to document not only the construction techniques, but also the philosophy behind the project. He wanted to ensure his successors understood it was about much more than rural engineering. "Dad, can I tell you a secret?" "Go ahead." "I'm proud to be your daughter, not because of the project's success, but because of the person you've become. Mum would be proud to see how you grew through the pain of loss. I'm the one who's proud to have a daughter who supported me even when everyone thought I was crazy. I didn't understand at first, but I trusted you, and I was right to trust." The conversation between father and daughter exemplified how the project had strengthened family bonds. The shared pain had transformed into a common purpose, uniting the family around values of solidarity and mutual care. The following years brought a quiet satisfaction to Walter. He had found a rhythm of life that fully satisfied him, tending the memorial garden, receiving visits from grandchildren, following the growth of the protection network from a distance, and having imaginary conversations with Dorothy about the achievements accomplished. The neighborhood had been completely transformed. What was once an ordinary community was now nationally recognized as the birthplace of a community protection movement. Tourists came to visit the original house, university students researched the project's social impact, and documentary filmmakers recorded residents' testimonies. But for Walter, the most important transformation was personal. He had gone from inconsolable widower to an example of how love can transcend death and become a transformative force in the lives of others. "Dorothy," he said one afternoon, sitting in the memorial garden, "it's been 15 years today since you left. 15 years I've honored your memory by doing what you would have wanted me to do, taking care of people. Do you know how many families are protected today? More than 100,000. 100,000 families who can sleep peacefully knowing their homes are safe. All because you had the courage to tell me about your fear. Thank you for teaching me that true love doesn't end with death. It multiplies and spreads, touching lives we can't even imagine." The one-sided conversation had become a comforting ritual. Walter felt that Dorothy was present in some way, approving the path he had chosen and celebrating the achievements reached. At 83 years old, Walter remained lucid and active, but had begun to feel the weight of age. He walked more slowly, tired more quickly, and needed more time to rest between activities. "Dad, don't you want to come live with us?" suggested Margaret during one of her visits. "It would be easier to take care of you." "No, my dear. I want to stay here until the end. This house has the protection I built for Dorothy. It has the garden I planted for her. It has the memories of an entire life. I'm not leaving. But what if something happens? If it happens, it will be here, in the place where I was happy with your mother, and where I built something that makes us proud." I couldn't ask for a more dignified death. Walter's determination was unshakable. He had chosen to live his final years in the place where it all began, surrounded by the structures he had built out of love and by the fruits of the work he had developed. The memorial garden bloomed magnificently that last year. The flowers seemed more colorful, the plants more vigorous, as if nature itself wanted to celebrate Walter's dedication. Neighbors commented they had never seen the garden so beautiful. "It's as if Mrs. Dorothy is sending a sign," commented Mrs. Ruth, now 90 but still lucid and caring. "Or perhaps it's Walter himself," replied Mr. Harold, now a widower, but continuing to care for his protected home. The love he put into this place made a difference even in the plants. The observations of the oldest neighbors reflected the affection and respect Walter had earned over the years. He had become more than a neighbor. He was a symbol of how determination and love can transform entire communities. End of story. Now tell me, what did you think of this moving story of love and overcoming? Walter managed to transform his pain over losing Dorothy into something that protects thousands of families to this day. Do you believe true love can really transcend death and become a protective force for others? Leave your sincere opinion in the comments. We really want to know what you felt with this touching narrative. Don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other stories that touch the heart.